Welcome to the Catholic Foodie Show. I'm Jeff Young, your host of the Catholic Foodie. So glad that you are listening today. So glad that you are here. I got to tell you, I am so excited. I'm so excited. I have been spending a lot of time lately with a friend. You know, you feel like when you read books sometimes you really get to know the author. Well, that's what I've been doing lately. I've been reading some books by Heather King, and I am just so excited that we actually have Heather King right here with us on the Catholic Foodie Show today. Heather, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is my pleasure. You know, I've been reading Parched, which I believe was your first memoir about recovering from alcoholism, or your story rather, and just such a fantastic book. And I wanted to have you on the show today specifically to talk about your latest book, which is entitled Loaded: Money and the Spirituality of Enough. That is
yes.
Awesome title. So thank you again for joining me today. And, loaded is, or can be, a loaded term, huh?
Yes, I think I chose it. First of all, I like one-word titles. I have a lot of them sort of past participle. I have Parched. I have Redeemed. I have a food book coming out soon called Famished.
Ooh.
And yeah, and so this is a book about money, and so loaded. And I like the implication of loaded. In other words, sort of flush. There's a certain swagger. There's an implication. Of course, loaded has one of its meanings is being high. So. I mean, I haven't done that in a long time, 29 years since I've had a drink or a drug. But the high on sort of life, the way that we are called, I think, to walk. We get to walk through life with a certain style, not a boastful, blowhard swagger, but a certain style, no matter how much or how little money we have, because our worth is not in money; it's in something beyond us that, for me in Christ. And I think Christ gives us very unique individuals. So he calls us to be our own person. And so getting freed of our attachments is part of that. I think is coming into our kind of true person that we are meant to be.
And you're talking about how money doesn't define us, right? It doesn't. It's not really who or what we are as people, as humans. And we could almost say that in our culture here in the United States, that is a countercultural idea. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, super countercultural. I mean, the system we live under is called capitalism. We live under a system that is moneyism. So it's profoundly countercultural. And to add to the mix is the fact that we live in this world, and we need money to get by. I'm not a wandering 14th century mendicant like St. Francis of Assisi, which I think I tried to be for a while. We live in a world with money that runs. So we need a certain amount of money to participate fully, to serve. So it's tricky. It's like the people with a food disorder. You have to eat, and
right.
You have to have money somehow or other. And so how to come to a relationship with it, making it, spending it, or coming by it some way or other, that is Christ-centered, and that's life-affirming, and that doesn't keep us in bondage to some weird kind of idol.
Right. Yes. You know, at the beginning of the book, and I have to say this first of all. Rarely do I get a book and am able to read the whole thing like within a day or two. Used to be, before I was a husband and a father with 4 kids and just, life, I was able to do that when I was a student. That was great. And I loved it because I love to read. But this book came in. I ordered it. I actually ordered the Kindle and the paperback. I wanted to pass the paperback off to my wife while I read the Kindle version, and I have to tell you, I read it in a day and a half. I couldn't put it down. It really spoke to me, and I'll tell you that some of it made me uncomfortable. And not that that's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, but some of it made me very uncomfortable. I'll tell you an example. In the very beginning, you tell the story of your friends Tinsy and Dennis with the Catholic worker in L.A. And just hearing that story, very real details of their life, of how they approached money and service and love and family was kind of unnerving. And I can say it was unnerving for me personally because I have always, I have to tell, I confess this, I feel like a fish out of water a lot of the time. Because when I was 18 years old, I left home and I joined the Missionaries of Charity Fathers, Mother Teresa's priests, down in Tijuana, Mexico. And I spent 2 years in formation with them. And so I lived among the poor. I worked with the poor. We were poor. And when I came back from that, I've been trying to here I am 45 years old, still trying to figure out how money, what role does it really play in my life? And so to hear these stories of Tinsy and Dennis just blew me away.
Yes, talk about countercultural.
Yeah.
Right. Dennis, by the way, is now serving 120 days in federal prison here in downtown L.A. for witnessing for peace at Vandenberg Air Force Base. Just to let the listeners know, this is they're not actually the LA Catholic worker, it's Guadalupe Catholic worker, which is up the coast. So they serve the very, very poor farm workers of the Central Coast. And they have a clinic and food distribution and clothing distribution. And he's 65. Tinsy is, I think, 18 years younger than he is. They have 2 teenage kids. And the Catholic worker, they live on donations. And they have this whole thing about they never want to be either in debt, so they will not go into debt of any kind, nor do they believe in hoarding. In other words, if they have enough money for the month and people offer them more, they'll give it away. So it's a radical, for those of us who are schooled, and our culture so tells us, save up and get your IRA. And in fact, Christ doesn't tell us to do that. He has a lot to say about don't store up your treasure here on earth. Store up your treasure in heaven. He has the example of the guy with the barn who puts his extra stuff, puts it in a barn, and he kind of says, you fool, your very life will be... Christ is not about saving up for the future. And I think we totally skip over that. It's so radical and so scary and so countercultural that we just don't even look at it, just like we don't look at much of the Gospels as an actual blueprint for life.
Right.
we really don't take Christ at his word about hardly anything. And I kind of, my sense is he's saying, this is the way, the truth, and the life. He's telling us how to live.
It can be very uncomfortable. It's when we grow up in this environment, right? This atmosphere, and this is kind of what we know from childhood on. And then to hear the gospel and to see it lived out. I think that was one of the things that was so radical about someone like Mother Teresa, who had the world stage, right? She had the world's attention, and she was someone that when she spoke, people really listened. They really listened. They had a deference, if nothing else. They listened because they knew that this is a woman who walked the walk or talked. How does it go? Walk the talk, whatever it is.
Yeah,
she lived it.
She walked the walk.
She lived it. That's right. And so people listen. Not that it changed everybody's lives necessarily, but it was just a radical way of following Jesus, a radical way of really seeing Jesus in other people and taking him at his word and serving them. And that's kind of the story I think you share with Tinsy and Dennis, and it can be unnerving. But yeah, I know that Jesus talks in the Gospels, you mentioned this in the book, that he doesn't hate money. He just doesn't seem to think about it much. Doesn't seem to worry about it.
Exactly. He knows he needs it. He seems completely unconcerned. He seems absolutely confident it will be there when and if he needs it. Oh, you need the temple tax? Oh, go open the mouth of a fish. It'll be there. Oh, go ask the guy, prepare the upper room. He'll know what you're talking about. Go get a donkey. He says, regard the lilies of the field. And doesn't your Father, the splendor with which he raised the lilies of the field, and every hair of your head is numbered. Don't worry about it. He knows what you need. Right. So that kind of radical trust, I think, is the spiritual principle. And there's a radical way for all of us to live out our lives. We're not all going to be Catholic worker model. We're not all going to go to Calcutta or wherever and live the missionary of charities model. But I think we're all called to that kind of radical, and God knows I'm not there, but I think but maybe we get a little closer, this radical trust. And the trust, it's because we're loved so much. It's not, you're not doing it right unless you have this kind of radical lifestyle. That's not it at all. It's just, I think we're missing, it's like, how
right.
sad, we're missing the full gift
right.
of Christ's love. If we're, to the exact extent that we are holding on to, well, let's hedge our bets. Christ, he's great, but let me, buy a gun and plump up my IRA.
That's
and
right.
It's kind of like we're on the horns of a dilemma. We're divided, and I think that's what he means by you can't serve both God and mammon. It's not money so much as God and self-reliance, sort
That's
of.
Right. And I want to come back to that. We do have to take a break. You listen to the Catholic Foodie Show. I'm Jeff Young, your host, with Heather King today. Don't go away. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to the Catholic Foodie Show here on Breadbox Media. I'm Jeff Young, your host, joined today by Heather King, author of Parched, and her latest book, Loaded, Money and the Spirituality of Enough. Heather, before the break, we were talking about, I was asking you about certain things because some of the things in the book made me feel a little uncomfortable because, it kind of goes back to the Gospels. And, you were talking, we talked a little bit about trusting God and how it's really the way that we look at God. And it reminded me of a part in the book where you talk about, I think one of the parables of Jesus that has for years and years made me the most nervous. And that is the parable of the talents. Do you remember that part?
Oh, yeah.
I can't help but get nervous because, you mentioned in the book about identifying with the guy who buried the one talent, and it,
right.
I've always seen it the same way, but you seem to have come to some sort of a breakthrough with that particular parable.
Yes. Do you want me to talk about it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just the whole idea, the concept, that difference. You talk about a difference in viewpoint, I guess, or viewing God.
Right. Well, yeah, and that brings me through to the viewpoint of my book, which is this incredible fear that I have always had around money, based on my childhood, as I think all our money stuff basically is. Kids in my family, bricklayer, lovely, hard working parents, and not, a bricklayer's salary. I don't even know if a bricklayer could do that today. So money stretched very thin and super financial anxiety. So my fear around money has always been there's a finite amount, it's going to run out, so you hoard what little you have and you spend as little money as you possibly can. So to me, the parable of the talents, first of all, it says right at the beginning, But the master is a hard, or no, it says when the guy with the one talent explains himself, he says, "I knew you were a hard and unforgiving master who reaped where he did not sow." Mm-hmm. So it's very difficult because, my heart's always been with the guy who buried his talent. Why would you let the guy who reaped where he did not sow benefit even more? He's already got too much. He's made money off the backs of the poor. Why wouldn't you bury your talent? No, I never took the talent to mean my natural gifts, which I've always understood. Of course, those are for the world. Mm-hmm. Not always, but since I got sober, those are for the world, and you give them freely, and you're grateful and all that. But as a writer, I talked about this in the book, as a freelance creative writer, trust me, it is a precarious living. And not to bite the hand that feeds me, but the Catholic world, as anyone who's worked in it will tell you, is not known for its extravagance with its employees or its workers. Mm-hmm. And to top it off, although the Catholic world, bless them, has totally, between Magnificat and the time, they've totally supported me, so I'm deeply grateful. But it's, it's not, I wouldn't call it like wild extravagance. And to top it all off, publishing across the board, a book, for instance, this is in or out of the Catholic publishing world, the royalty split between a publisher and a writer is approximately 88-12 in their favor. Mm-hmm. So for all of you who want to think you make a killing as an author, after all the publishers, after your usually puny advance is paid off, and after they make that cost, you get maybe $1 a book. Mm-hmm. And your advance is paid off at that rate. So they're making basically 9 times as much as you are out of the game. So anyway, the point is, I got to accept the things I can't change. I can't sit around being angry about that. That's the way of the world. Okay, let me be grateful. But what had happened was this certain publisher had offered to gather some of my work, the work I'd done for them, into a small book. And as usual, it's going to be the 88-12. And I just kind of thought, I wanted to dig my heels in and say, listen, I'm just going to self-publish it on Amazon, which is also, of course, a horrible, rapacious corporate. But anyway, you just can't. But as a writer, you make a way bigger royalty, and I thought, I'll have control, and I can design the cover I want, and et cetera. You've been through this process, mm-hmm. Jeff. And so my impulse was, I'm just going to keep it. In a way, I'm going to take my talent and keep it to myself and do it my way. And yes, there'll be probably a way, not as wide an audience, because these people had some clout and have a wide circulation, but who cares? Because it'll be mine, and et cetera. You get it. Then one night I was lying in bed and literally in the middle of the night woke up and just sort of like a lightning bolt, I thought the parable of the talents. And I thought, that's what that is really about. It's about, if we feel that God reaps where he does not sow and is a harsh taskmaster and is trying to make money off of us, we're in wrong relationship with him. And we're gonna shut down in a way that is very spiritually unhealthy, that is not life-affirming and enriching. And so I realized, my job is to just get my work out. If I have a gift for writing, whatever gift I have, my job is to do it, do the hard labor, make a humane living somehow or other, and get it out to as wide an audience as I can. That's right. Without, compromising my integrity. So, and I did this, I had some spiritual direction with this too, where people had pointed out to me that my attitude, they were like, I sense some anger in there, and that's also the value of spiritual direction, because I think we can all, I can just get up on my high horse and really think, I'm having the convictions, my Christ-like, very highly developed convictions, and I'm willing to suffer, and I'm really just kind of, burying my talent in one way or another. shutting down, keeping it small, really kind of withholding. So I said, "Oh, I'd love to have you do the book. Thank you so much." And then it was done, and I've made like $300 on it, which is very typical. But so there you go. And that was my understanding. And I'm sure there are many, many other understandings of the parable of the talents. One thing I know it's not about is usury or, promoting.
Right.
I think we're not meant to make money on our money. I say this to someone who has IRAs. It seems, and lately I've been thinking, it's like our money is meant to bear fruit in another way,
right.
Not by making more money and then just having it sit there. So this is something I struggle with, as we all do. I'm a 64-year-old, single, childless, spouseless woman. And so the impulse to be fearful about my own mother died of Alzheimer's. Oh, what's going to happen to me? I've never even owned a house. But I think more and more I see, let the money bear fruit some other way, and you'll be taken care of. I have to trust that. And
it really is, I think, a lot about trust. I was a teacher. I taught high school in a Catholic high school for a long time, and also did youth ministry, that kind of stuff. And then I just got to a point to where I don't know if it was stress or whatever. Katrina happened and all, but I just got to a point where I felt like I just couldn't do it anymore. It just wasn't in me. And so I did something really crazy. I didn't leave a law firm like you did, but I left teaching, which is not known as the most lucrative thing in the world. And when I was self-employed, I did websites. I wrote, content for businesses on their websites. I set up email systems, things like that. Do a lot of IT stuff for businesses, and I did that for 6 years. I did 6 years as a self-employed and terrified every morning, waking up like, am I going to have work today? When's the next check coming? But I have to say, looking back, that it was an exercise in trust, and it was painful. And even though God again and again and again and again showed me that He was taking care of us, showed me that He was providing for us, every time another bill came up and I'm waiting on a check, or not knowing where the check was coming from, I'd be terrified again. It was just over and over again. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to have you here on the Catholic Foodie Show, because I know that a lot of the people who listen to this show are moms and dads. They've got kids in the house. And if you look around the country today, what's the biggest fear that people have? It's about money. People are afraid, right? And they have a lot of stress around money. So I'm so glad that we can talk about things like divine providence, that God is here. It's a challenge to really. I think we in our culture are conditioned to believe that we do it all. That we idolize the guy who can, the self-made man, the guy who pulls himself up by the bootstraps. But in reality, and I think we are coming up on a break here, but after the break I want to talk about this some more. In reality, there is no self-made man, right? In reality, we need, and this is biblical, it goes back to how God made us. We need each other, and we need communion, and we need connection. And I know that without that real communion, we really have nothing. And that's definitely something I want to explore with you after the break. We do need to take a break. You're listening to the Catholic Foodie Show on Breadbox Media. I'm your host, Jeff Young, joined today by Heather King. Don't go away. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to the Catholic Foodie Show. I'm Jeff Young, your host, the Catholic Foodie, joined today by author Heather King. The author of Loaded is her most recent book, Loaded: Money and the Spirituality of Enough. Heather, I really wanted to have you on the show today. I mentioned this last segment because first of all, I love the book. I love the book, and it really touched things in me that were very important. That needed to be touched, but also challenged. You know, that it helped me to see some things I needed to see in a new way. And I wanted to help spread the word about this book and about the work that you do. And one of the things that really came across in the book is something that I think is very much aligned to what I do here at the Catholic Foodie. You know, we're not necessarily talking about food today, although I might see if I can get you to say a thing or two about your next book, but we'll get to that. In the meantime, you know, a lot of what I do here is really about communion. You know, it's communion around the table of the Eucharist and also around the family dinner table. Those are definitely connected. And God himself made us for communion. And that sense of communion, that real connection in relationships is vital to our lives. We're called to that. It's what God made us, how he made us to be. And yet, it is such a difficult thing to find, to have, to allow to happen in life today. And you talk about communion and connection in Loaded, especially when it comes to money. It's important.
Super important. I mean, we have Christ who gives him his body and blood to us. I mean, he's all about Eucharist, about sitting around the table together. And, you know, that family that I talked about with 8 kids, I think one of the things, maybe the thing that has saved me from my own blocks and wounds and sins and compulsions is the fact that we had supper together. It makes me choke up even now, every single night around that table together. That's what my parents did for us. My father would come home from this hard day of work, and my mother would have dinner. You know, we kids would have helped, but they had a garden. We had everything was homemade because we didn't have a ton of money, so it was cheaper to make things from scratch. We ate. I look back and we ate so well, but we always had supper together. And all of us kids, we're totally grown. We're in our 50s and 60s now, and we all will talk about when we get together. Always, do you remember the stories and the food and the recipes? So that centrality of food, and it reminds us, one of the links with money is that is what money is for, to get everyone around the table,
yes.
to include everyone, whether it's a literal, I'm actually going to go shopping after food shopping because I'm having a little dinner party tomorrow night. And that's part of the way, as I said, I'm single, and part of what I have to be responsible for, my own emotional and spiritual health, is really making sure that I spend enough time with people and that I open my own doors and that I accept invitations when other people open their doors. And that feeds all of us. I think to get back to the fear around money that we all are prone to, part of that, as you say, is because our culture we are so isolated. So the fear is, I'm going to die alone. I'm going to run out of money and no one is going to be there to help me. You don't feel that. When we're in community, I think that is way, way, way lessened. When we know we can count on each other, and when people have been able to count on us our whole lives, that's our true insurance in a way. It's community. So yes, and I do think it is hard. It requires a certain amount of effort always. Community is very difficult, as we all know, whether it's community of our family, of our parish, of our fellowships of various kinds. Community is very, very messy, but they knew him in the breaking of bread. They didn't know him in the perfect, untouched loaf. They knew him in the breaking of bread, and that's what happens in community and around the table. So instead of saving all my money for the day when I'm going to die alone in a nursing home and have no one, more and more, I think, for heaven's sakes, open your doors and have a party, have a dinner party. Some version doesn't necessarily, there are lots of versions of the dinner party of the Eucharist that are not necessarily specifically about a meal that we eat, although that's always kind of the height of it. But various kinds of hospitality, I think, that we can be a part of.
That's right. And I think, as we mentioned earlier, that sometimes we have our own issues. Like I know I look at money, I kind of hinted at it earlier. I have, a woundedness in my own life, right? I have just things from whether it's when I was a kid or just growing up, just being part of this culture that we live in. There's woundedness inside of me, and there are things that I do really well and things that I don't do really well. And what I have noticed is that sometimes when I'm on my own, and I tend to like that. I tend to like to spend time by myself. When I do that, what happens is I become very blind to reality, and I start to see things in a way that, it's just not very clear. And one of the things that I have been very, very grateful for, and believe me, this is another, I've had some growing pains. With this, but one of the things that I value so much is having people in my life who love me, that I love, but who can help me to keep perspective, who can help me when I'm maybe not seeing things as clearly as possible. And the person that God has given me who has helped me the most in this area is my wife. So we can, I may be completely off base about something, and I'm talking to her about it, and she can help me to see the error of my ways, so to speak. And perhaps that's just part of maturity or whatever. But I know that as I was reading through the book, reading through Loaded, Money and the Spirituality of Enough, that was one of the things that struck me, is that, we can't heal ourselves. We can't make ourselves better. That it happens in community, however that community looks. It happens. We need each other. We need each other.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to rub up against each other to see where our wounds are. We need to be embraced and loved and held in our sort of awakening and in our continuing pain. Yes, and we need spiritual guidance or direction in whatever form, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a person with that title, but whether it's a wife or a husband or a friend or a priest, a sponsor of various, there's all kinds of forms of sponsors. Absolutely. And I'm thinking too, the family, which is the heart of everything, and that whole everyone around the table and the community and the fellowship. I think part of what is difficult is, and Christ is our guide. And I think one of the deepest power systems, maybe the deepest, is the family. And our families both, of course, they've nurtured us, they've formed us, but Christ was very clear: honor your father and mother, but don't be kept in bondage by an unhealthy family system. And we all know people who, we emulate our parents because, my God, they cared for us, they gave us life. But sometimes we get, say we have a father who worked his whole life super, super hard at a job he didn't like and was always kind of faintly angry and faintly bitter, and as many people do, worked his whole life against the day when he would retire. And then we all know these people, and the week they retire, they dropped out of a heart attack, just before they were going to start their life. And I think we can be really, really attached to be out of loyalty to being like our parents were. We don't want to betray them in a way by betraying their system that, after all, supported us and nourished us. And I think that can be sort of subconscious. I mean, I have a deep I come from a blue-collar family, and I got a law degree, and I was deeply conflicted about, if you come from a family also where not a lot of people in it have money, it can seem like a super betrayal and a very, it's a conflict. It can be a conflict. You feel like you're betraying your roots in some way. I mean, that can cut both ways. Clearly, if you come from a family with a lot of money, if you want to step out of the mold and, say, become a creative writer or a nurse or something where you're not going to make megabucks, we know there are families that are super, super disapproving of that. And so I think that's a lot of what I'm also trying to get at here of, Christ said, unless you hate your father and mother, it's a deeply, talk about a disturbing statement. And he clearly doesn't mean hate them. He says honor your father and mother. But unless you're willing to risk their disapproval, which is unbelievably difficult on every level, unless we're willing to step out of that family system, we're liable to be in bondage to something that is not totally life-enriching and therefore not really based in Christ, but in some other kind of sort of neurotic fear. So that's really challenging stuff, I think, right?
Definitely. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to the Catholic Foodie Show. I'm Jeff Young, your host, the Catholic Foodie, here today with author Heather King. Her most recent book being Loaded, Money and the Spirituality of Enough. And Heather, before the break, we were talking about just like that family dynamic, and the family that you come from and wanting to honor your father and mother, but at the same time, you got to be your own person and you can't sort of like live under the thumb of anybody else. And whether that's, an actively living under the thumb, like someone's trying to make you live a certain way, or just the baggage that we bring. As we grow up into adulthood. I know that my wife and I have done some work with marriage prep, and even in our own marriage, we've had to deal with this too. But in the training to become like a couple who prepares other couples for marriage, they talked a lot about family of origin issues, and I could tell you that we all enter into marriage with baggage. We all bring stuff with us, and marriage is kind of like my wife likes to say, it's like putting 2 tea bags in hot water, right? That hot water is like everything comes out. So
that's very good.
So that's
I love that.
And you got to deal with that kind of stuff, I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, I think it's just, the bondage to old ideas.
Right.
So I think we were going to talk about kind of specifically what that looks like in my case.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like the specific angle of my book is this kind of concept of under-earning. Is one way to put it. But, my own money stuff, I grew up in New England, by the way, and so super Puritan. I'm a convert. I always joke, people say, oh, why did you convert to Catholicism? And I say I needed something softer and more tender than the Puritan work ethic Calvinism with which I was raised. But seriously, in New England, there's this whole sort of idea, and it's not entirely a wrong idea by any means, but that doing without is a sign of high character. Doing without, that's actually the phrase. And it goes across the board, whether you're super poor or whether you're super rich. So you'll have these people with old New England money who will not heat, for instance, their 20-room, quote, summer cottage that is worth millions of dollars. They'll wear this kind of quintessential, the sweater with the holes in it. But it really, so there's something to that. And clearly we do not want to be greedy consumers. And clearly we're called by the Gospels not to have a whole lot more than we need and to be grateful for what we have and to be good stewards. But there's a way that the sort of going without, in my case, can lead to this kind of scarcity mentality, self-deprivation, that when you cross that with the whole Catholic give until it hurts and we're for the poor can really, I think, lead to a kind of pathology where the goal isn't like a healthy sort of fasting from certain things. In order to share, it becomes a kind of a spiritual athleticism where, oh, I'm different from other people. This is how much I can do. I can get all my clothes at the Goodwill. That's how little I care about money, property, and prestige. I can live on 27 cents a day. I mean, okay, that's great if you only make 27 cents a day, but I had a law degree.
Right.
And so, for me, and it becomes this kind of, again, it's another version of the parable of the talents. I'm going to get it over on the man. I'm not going to participate in the system in a way that is prideful, though, that is not the way of Christ. My kingdom is not of this world, but we're in the world. Christ doesn't, he's not against stuff. He's for love. And so he never makes a big deal about, I'm going to be this countercultural revolutionary. He walks through the world with love, which is in and of itself radical and revolutionary without calling attention to itself. So it's this kind of anorexia. It's the difference between an anorexic and someone who truly is fasting out of love. It's a kind of self-based deprivation. And that's what my life became and my whole thing around money. So that's and there's lots of people, it turns out, like that. And for instance, they're the people with a ton of degrees who work at the 7-Eleven because they've somehow convinced themselves that's all they can do, or that's the only job they can get, or that's the only job they can kind of emotionally handle. It's just kind of, I don't have enough money to go to the dentist, and that makes me holy. That makes me holy because I'm poor. I don't know if a normal person can understand. It sounds insane as I say it, but there's lots of people who fall into that category, and so and then if you work as I do, if you write about spirituality, I mean, you have a radio show that's about the spirituality of food, and there can be this. You know this, I'm sure, as well as I do. There can be this whole thing in yourself that says, I shouldn't make money off of this. I'm writing about the things of Christ. I'm writing about the things of the Gospels, right?
Oh, yeah.
And if you feel that way, the people around you, trust me, will be more than happy to cooperate with you and say, no, you shouldn't make money doing that. And there are often people who live in gated communities. And so for me, it really, I had to begin to want to, and this only came about with the aid of people who had kind of had this sort of wrong kind of thinking and had come to a kind of awakening around it. But really, I had to learn to make more and spend more. And to someone who's terrified of being a horrible, greedy consumer, that is very frightening. But that's how it kind of came about. And one of the ways I started was getting really clear about my money, literally keeping track of every penny I earned and every penny I spent. And this can sound very non-spiritual and very, I think we tend to think, I'm above money, and so I just don't pay that much attention to it. But that is not spiritual in any way. And I found that when I was willing to be specific about it, it took the metaphysical weight off of money. Money becomes just a tool. It becomes a number. The amount of money I have or don't have says nothing about my actual worth. It's a tool. Why wouldn't I want to keep track of it? And so that began to open the door. And people just asked me to help me to sort of ask for more. I have to make a humane living. Clearly, I'm not making it off of my books. Okay, I can speak. All right, how much money do I ask? And I began to ask for more money. That was one major way I began to make a way more humane living. I asked for what I thought I was worth. And that, again, super difficult. Oh, people will think I'm greedy. People will think I'm pushy. People will think, what will they think? What will they think?
Yeah.
You could you could look at all of how that would translate into the starving people of China, the amount of money. And it's like, I need to pay my rent. I need to put gas in my car. So anyway, and I lay out in the book literally the specifics I lay out the figures, how much money I made and how much I spent for this certain 3-month period, 1 year apart, before and after my kind of recovery. And I think that's kind of radical in our culture.
Oh, yeah.
We are super secretive around money. Our best friends don't know how much money we have. They don't know how we spend it, what we do with it, how we budget it. No. Taboo. And why is it a taboo? Why does it have to be a taboo? So I hope by just laying it out, it takes some of the taboo off it. Why is it a secret? Why? It's a tool of love. Let's have a conversation about how to be around it and be freer around it and share more of it.
Well, I think when you share your story like that and you're sharing the details of your story like that, that's something I think that speaks to people. We're afraid of money, and we're afraid of all the things around money. And so if you are sharing your story and sharing those details, as you do in the book, Loaded, Money and the Spirituality of Enough, then it gives other people courage. And I think it can inspire other people. And I know from myself, reading the book, part of it just cut me right to the heart. I went through some of that too, just being self-employed and trying to figure out, it's like, okay, I've never done this self-employed thing before. How do I charge for my services? And going from charging a teeny tiny amount, because that's what I don't know if I didn't put it in these words, but basically that's what I'm worth, to eventually growing into, wow, they want this. Oh, okay, it's going to be this amount, and it's a much bigger number, and it allows me to actually support my family. It was a growing experience for me, and an eye-opening experience. I'll say this: we're running close out of time, but just to see the power of money and how our view, how it can affect us. There were some potential clients that I had. Or almost had, who they simply didn't go with me for my services because I didn't charge enough. So in their view, if I wasn't charging enough, then the quality must not have been as good. So anyway, it's interesting how it goes both ways. It definitely goes both ways. But Heather, thank you so much for joining me here on The Catholic Foodie today. Where can people find you online? I know you have a website. What is the address?
I do, and it's Heather King with a hyphen in the middle. So Heather-King.com, and blog, books, events.
Well, thank you again so much. This is the Catholic Foodie Show on Breadbox Media. I'm Jeff Young, your host, joined today by Heather King. And until next time, bon appetit.